As a young single parent to a child, Claire was determined to find comfort in a loving partner. It's a shame that the man she wanted to believe was good turned out to be such a terrible monster instead. Even in her own childhood, she always saw the good in people. But unfortunately, Christopher McGowan was not to be underestimated. It would only be a matter of time before she experienced the true horror he could create. And unfortunately, Scotland's flawed judicial system would assist in all of this. Chris was a man who made one poor decision after another. In fact, he was so full of them that police knew exactly who he was for all of the wrong reasons. Now, of course, there is much more to this horrible story than these few horrible facts, but this video serves as a reminder to how badly someone can ruin your life. Hopefully you know where you are by now, but if not, my name is Adrian and welcome to Coffeehouse Crime. I post up to 4 videos a week here, so if you like darkly fascinating content, please consider subscribing. And now, with that said, please grab yourself a coffee, pull up a seat and get ready for the deep dive. This is the case of Claire Inglis. Welcome back, folks. Now, with our previous case being so long, we're going to keep this one slightly more direct. If you cast your eyes north of England, you will find yourself in the beautiful mountainous terrains of Scotland. Our case today pulls us to the centre of this incredible country, to a small city named Stirling. Now, it is said that Stirling clasps the lowlands and the highlands of Scotland together, and he who holds Stirling holds Scotland itself. This place has an abundance of ancient history too. Bones found here were radiocarbon dated to be more than 4,000 years old. This means that the city has been under many empires since then, and nowadays it is home to roughly 38,000 residents. Stirling has become a market town, specializing in transport, communications and retail. But economic statistics aside, there is not much else to note about this city, to be honest. If you're looking for a quiet and docile place to live, then Stirling has you covered. But it is here, in this city, that we could find Claire Inglis. Born to her parents Ian and Fiona Inglis in 1993, Claire enjoyed a peaceful life without much discord. With a naturally loving personality, she aspired to become a childminder. And so, after graduating school, she attended university to study childminding. To her surprise, it was in June of 2014 that Claire would become a mother herself. I'll be protecting his name in this video, but she was absolutely smitten with her baby boy. Tragically though, her son's father lost his life only 3 years later in 2017 when he was involved in a car accident. This, of course, unfortunately leaving Claire to raise him all alone. According to those who knew her, she lived for her son. Her days were scheduled around him, taking him to and from school, and generally just ensuring he had everything he needed to be happy. As a person herself though, Claire loved everything pink, and was described as a caring and bubbly person by friends and family alike. In short, she was a happy and outgoing young woman with a passion for helping others, looking after children, and appreciating all things Disney. The loss of her son's father was absolutely devastating news, but 2 years later, Claire was ready to start dating again, and it wouldn't take long for her to cross paths with another man. Unfortunately, sometimes opposites attract, and although Claire was kind-hearted and a lovely young woman, she found comfort in a man who was great at concealing his true colours. So, this is where I must introduce you to another deplorable person, and this man's name was Christopher McGowan. Although Chris was known in the area to be a decorator and a painter, many would be forgiven for thinking that his actual profession was in collecting jail time. Known as Kicky for all of the wrong reasons, he had become a familiar figure to police in the area, and expressed no desire in changing his ways. At the tender age of 14, Christopher made his first encounter with the law by being charged with breach of the peace. The following 14 years unfolded like a tumultuous saga, marked by a series of more than 40 offences and accompanying sentences for a myriad of crimes. Ranging from minor transgressions like criminal damage and shoplifting to more severe charges such as peddling heroin and menacing a police officer with a knife, it appeared Christopher was was on an unrelenting quest to find himself entangled in the criminal justice system. Sporting a scar on his face and a local reputation as an aggressive troublemaker and a man of crime, Christopher's relationship with Claire surprised many of those who knew of his checkered history. Actually, speaking after the fact, many described them as chalk and cheese. They had entirely opposite personalities, but despite this, they did share a mutual attraction for one another, an attraction which, over the weeks, would blossom into the early stages of a relationship. Claire's mother, Fiona, recalls the first time the pair had ever interacted. While walking around the city, Chris shouted at her on the street. At the time, Claire was glad to get away from him, so it did seem strange that, over the next couple months, they would end up together instead. In almost no time at all, Claire and Chris found themselves deeply entwined in a romantic relationship. And despite reservations and concerns expressed by her friends and family, Claire remained steadfast in her belief that deep down he was a good man. Sadly though, when her parents voiced their own concerns, she would dismiss their objections as being overdramatic, labeling them as drama queens and expressing her confidence that, in time, he would change. On October the 3rd, 2021, Claire updated her status on Facebook to say, in a relationship. Sadly though, in the meantime, Chris and his behaviour again landed him behind bars. He was being held in Lomos Prison, which was approximately 23 miles southwest of Stirling. Now, Claire visited him numerous times while he was locked away. I think that deep down she knew that he was bad news, but she also felt confident that this could be the turning point in his life and their relationship. By now, he had amassed close to 40 charges over the years. No surprise, many of which were for breaching his bail conditions or breaching of the peace. Amidst his rather impressive catalogue of offences, including minor vandalism, hazardous driving and drug possession, were 3 charges of assault. One of these charges, dating back to the year 2014, was later described as having a domestic element, and so we can only assume this meant that he assaulted a loved one. To date, his longest jail term spanned just over 21 months, which is the price you pay after threatening an officer with a knife. It was during his time inside that, tragically, Christopher's mother passed away. When he spoke to social workers about this, he was adamant that this was the change he needed for his life. Now, Chris had no intention of attending his mother's funeral in handcuffs, and so he leaned on his blossoming relationship with Claire to prove he could be bailed out without any repercussions. As November 2021 arrived, Christopher remained incarcerated in HMP Lomos. And with his current charges coming from dangerous driving while attempting to evade police during a chase, he was set to be in here for quite a while. Nevertheless, Claire would faithfully visit him whenever possible. In the UK, facing criminal charges leads to either being held in custody until sentencing or being released on bail. The latter is typically reserved for cases when there's confidence in the individual's appearance in court and compliance with set conditions. And so it's quite strange that, despite Christopher's extensive legal history in Scotland, reports suggested a leaning towards his release. In this report, a social worker's assessment highlighted his challenging upbringing, emphasising that most of his offences were considered to be low level. The reports also acknowledged his newfound relationship with Claire, noting its positive impact on him. Christopher claimed that it motivated him to abstain from alcohol and Valium, both of which were substances that had fueled his past offences. With his connection with Claire described as a positive relationship, it provided a stabilising influence on what had so far been a tumultuous life for Chris. Now, one of the bail conditions that is required stipulates being bailed to a specific address rather than a general release. And so, after careful consideration, Christopher was bailed to Claire's address under one special condition, that being he must adhere to a curfew between 9 PM and 7 AM, and any violation of this or any of his other bail conditions would result in him being returned to jail. Now, after all of the problems and chances he had been given, you would think that Chris would use his common sense and gratitude to better himself. But sadly, you would be mistaken here. Almost immediately upon moving into Claire's home, he embarked on a spree of selling or pawning many of her belongings, all of which were disgustingly used to help fund his drinking and drug habits. This even included selling a watch she had received as a gift on her 21st birthday, and even selling her son's gaming console. Even still, the money made through these deplorable actions never seemed to be enough for Chris. It was later revealed that Claire had accumulated thousands of pounds worth of debt. This was either through purchasing items for Chris or through him secretly purchasing things under her name. Seriously folks, if you ever spot someone doing this, run for the hills. Only the most morally corrupt and selfish are capable of stealing from a loved one. Soon enough, Claire would frequently phone her friends and family asking for money, and although she usually gave the excuse to say that it was essentials for her son, most of them knew that deep down, it was actually for Chris. In fact, Claire's parents actually believed that most of the text messages sent by Claire was actually from Chris himself, because there was a distinct change in his writing style. Unknown to any of them at the time, but Claire was also facing a lot of verbal abuse from him too. In fact, one night when driving home in a taxi, the taxi driver recalls him threatening to kill her if she didn't buy him a chip butty. For you Americans out there, a chip butty is basically a sandwich with french fries in the middle. And no, I don't know why the British are like this. As the months passed by, Claire faced increasing resistance from her family and friends. I mean, they all loved her with all of their hearts, which is why they felt so strongly about her leaving a man who was so clearly rotten to the core. But many of us know how this can be. We see a person's ideal qualities and try to ignore all of the glaring red flags. Claire was a stubborn lover, and she so desperately wanted to make this work. But now, after voicing their objections, there was sadly nothing that her loved ones could do. They would just have to wait and see and let Claire come to her own decision. But tragically, as with many of these cases, she had no idea what was waiting for her just around the corner. On the fateful day of November the 28th, 2021, Claire reached out to her mother once again, asking for £25 for her son. But despite her plea, Fiona remained unconvinced and answered back with a firm no. And she responded further by activating Do Not Disturb mode on her phone. Both parents knew from experience that, sadly, this wouldn't be the end of it. A barrage of messages and calls usually followed after this, and so they had to protect their own time. But sadly, little did they know, this would be the last opportunity they would have to speak to their daughter. Later that same night, both Christopher and Claire were spotted indulging in drinks in the heart of Stirling. This, of course, meaning that Christopher was brazenly violating his bail conditions. Shortly after this, Claire then returned to her residence in St Ninians. A surveillance camera captured her entering a shop on Bannockburn Road. Grainy footage documented her purchasing a few items from the shop, with the owner kindly holding the door open as she vanished into the night. This footage would be the last known recording of her alive. The next chapter unfolded at 5 AM that morning, with a jarring awakening for two of Claire's neighbours. Drunk out of his mind and even slurring on his own words, Christopher shouted, "Wake up, I think I've killed her." Rushing into Claire's flat, the neighbours were met with a scene of horror. Claire lay on the bedroom floor in a terrible state. They attempted CPR while an ambulance was called to the property, though sadly, it became evident early on that their efforts would prove futile. Amidst the numerous injuries sustained across her face, they would also have to dislodge a wet wipe which was stuffed down her throat, and tragically, this had obstructed her airways. Despite paramedics doing their very best to resuscitate her, Claire's terrible fate had already been sealed. She had been murdered in cold blood, and of course, logically speaking, there was only one person who could be responsible. So, no surprise, Christopher McGowan was swiftly arrested and charged with her murder. And it's also not a surprise to learn that he strongly denied any responsibility. According to him, she had accidentally overdosed on Valium and then fallen down the stairs, which also apparently explains the numerous facial injuries. Sure, Chris, and I guess that wet wipe just magically lodged itself into her throat on the way down, right? Thanks to his long-standing reputation with the law, nobody was buying his story. Friends, family, and even strangers alike all believed that he'd murdered Claire. And now he would have to pay. When the trial commenced in Edinburgh's High Court, presided over by Judge Michael O'Grady, the shocking extent of Claire's injuries was unveiled for the public to see for the first time. The report exposed many gruesome details, which left those in the courtroom both traumatized and shocked. Claire had suffered severe trauma. Both of her eyes had been blackened, and a screwdriver had been used to stab her in the face. Over 70 distinct injuries were sustained that evening, including burns inflicted with a lighter, strangulation, and the forcible insertion of a wipe down her throat. The official cause of death was determined to be strangulation or choking. Throughout legal proceedings, the court meticulously detailed every act of violence inflicted on Claire that fateful night. The summary alone paints a vivid picture of a brutal and sadistic assault on a woman who stood at a mere 5 feet and 2 inches. This comprehensive account thoroughly disqualified any alternative theories put forth by Chris, to which he continued to claim was an overdose gone wrong or an accidental fall down the stairs. The case unfolded for over a week, in which all the evidence was meticulously presented to the courtroom. When the time came for the jury to render their verdict, it would only take them 2 hours to find it. And no surprise, they ruled that Christopher McGowan was guilty for the murder of Claire Inglis. As a result, Chris was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 23 years behind bars.
The fact is, this young woman was not only murdered, she was subjected by you to nothing short of torture. I shudder to imagine what her last minutes were like. To describe what you did as sadistic falls woefully short of the mark. It was beyond sadistic.
The judge would go on to say, "I have in particular mind the victim impact statement of her young son, who now spends each day lonely, bereft and bewildered, unable to make sense of why he must grow up without his mother." The reprehensible and prolonged assault which resulted in her tragic death was characterized by the conduct of a terrible man who is simply unfit to exist in a decent society. And while there may be some degree of satisfaction that Christopher was sentenced to the longest jail term possible under current laws, there is one crucial question which arose in the courtroom's shadow. That being, why was he ever re-released on bail to begin with? Quite understandably, these questions were only amplified when it became known that Chris already had domestic assault convictions against another partner. And so, many people, including Claire's parents, were left wondering how on earth this was allowed to happen. I mean, let's just lay all of this out on the table here. Here we have a man with former domestic assault charges being granted bail for another crime to stay with another partner who has no idea about these previous charges. All of this just seemed incredibly short-sighted by the system. These realizations were incredibly angering to say the least. In fact, the public was so upset by it that the news found its way to the Scottish government. And although it couldn't be answered, the question itself was straightforward enough. Why was an abuser granted bail into the home of a partner and a young child? In a statement to the court, Claire's father said, "He should have never been put in her flat with my grandson and Claire, not with the criminal record he had." Both then and now, the prevailing sentiment is undeniably difficult to dispute. How could a habitual criminal with a history of repeatedly breaching bail even be under consideration as a candidate in the first place? Moreover, what information allowed the judge to grant him bail anyway? The social worker who was responsible for these recommendations, who also emphasized the positive impacts of a new relationship and his determination to overcome substance abuse, still remains unnamed to this day. While acknowledging the tragic outcome, a follow-up review of the process found no glaring missteps in the decision to release Christopher on bail. While the fact that the matter reached the governmental level signaled a strong acknowledgement of the issue, the resolution was sadly evasive. Matters of bail, remand and similar issues are generally decided by judges, and the government refrained from intervening or passing judgments on such matters. The outrage and quest for answers were not confined to Claire's parents alone. Numerous groups, including women's aid and entities within the judicial system itself, such as judges and police, voiced objections to the government's enactment of the Bail and Release from Custody Act. They believed that this legislation unduly constrained judges' options to keep individuals in custody while pending trial. Claire's mother would sum this tragedy up perfectly by expressing Claire's unwavering belief that Christopher would change. A belief that tragically transformed into a reality, albeit in the most sinister form. He became a murderer. Claire Inglis was a young woman full of life, joy, and happiness. She dedicated herself not only to raising her son, but also to caring for other children. Her degree and ambition focused on the well-being of children, and every facet of her being was geared towards doing good in the world and helping others. Friends described her as a beautiful, incredible young mum, a woman who selflessly gave her time away for the benefit of others. And it seems that this endless faith in others, this belief that people were fundamentally good, was taken advantage of. Her memory will live on through her son, a boy who is now orphaned and being raised by his grandparents. A memorial page for Claire Inglis is filled with endless platitudes about her positive influence on their lives. Good memories of happy times, and every single one of them is a testament to what a great person she was. Claire was robbed of her life. Her son was robbed of his one remaining parent, and her family lost a very loving daughter. It should never take a tragedy like this to have the legal system reassess their conduct, but we can only hope that another life can be saved with the hard lessons learned from this tragic affair. Those who love her carry her love for the light in life, and the words inscribed on a bench in her memory sum all of this up very well. Always loved, forever missed, never forgotten. We will look for you in rainbows. A while ago, one of my closest friends said to me, "Adrian, when you look at someone through rose-colored glasses, all of those red flags just look like flags." Okay, and this may have originated from BoJack Horseman, but I find the saying to be incredibly powerful and accurate, especially in Claire's case. Hopefully, this quote may now stick with you too. And should you ever need it in the future, may it be the small voice that will remind you of the self-respect that you deserve. Anyway folks, so concludes today's video. Thank you so much for watching, I really do appreciate you being here. Before you go though, I'd like to know your thoughts about this case, because of course Claire could have left Christopher earlier, but as we all know, she was just so in love and adamant that he could change. This is also a casual reminder that I do in fact now sell coffee, so if you want to support the channel, check out classifiedcoffeeco.com. To add to that, if you want to see extra content or just follow me and Nero on our adventures, then please check out my social media, most notably my Instagram. You can also get early access to my content and additional content over on my Patreon. And yeah, that's pretty much it folks. Thank you again so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you again very soon for another one. Until that moment arrives though, remember to look after yourself, look after each other, and of course stay safe. Thank you, and goodbye.